It wasn't struck by a plane. It didn't appear in the early headlines, and for most of September 11th, 2001, it wasn't even part of the chaos people were watching on TV. But just after 5:20 p.m., in the dust-choked ruins of Lower Manhattan, a 47-story skyscraper suddenly buckled. Its steel frame twisted inward, the structure shuddered, and then in a matter of seconds, it collapsed entirely. World Trade Center 7, the forgotten building of 9/11, was gone. No warning, no impact, no jet fuel, just fire and failure, or so the official story claimed. From the ashes of Ground Zero, one of the most persistent conspiracy theories of the 21st century was born. But behind the mystery, behind the doubt and digital rabbit holes, there's a real story, one of overlooked design flaws, burning diesel fuel, and the near impossible task of managing a city in crisis. This is the story of the collapse of World Trade Center 7, and why it haunts people, even now. In the early morning hours of September 11, 2001, New York's skyline shimmered with normalcy. World Trade Center 7 stood proudly among the downtown giants. At 610 feet tall, it wasn't as iconic as the Twin Towers, but it wasn't small either. A dark, mirrored glass monolith, it towered over the northern edge of the World Trade Center complex, just across Vesey Street. Inside were tenants of extreme importance, offices for the Secret Service, IRS, and SEC, and a command center built for emergencies called the OEM Bunker. Designed by the city to withstand hurricanes, blackouts, and yes, terrorist attacks. It sat high on the 23rd floor, a fortress in the sky. At 8:46 a.m., American Airlines Flight 11 hit the North Tower. At 9:03, United 175 hit the south. As fireballs consumed the towers and panic took hold, the emergency response shifted into high gear. But ironically, the much-touted OEM command center in WTC-7 couldn't be used. It was too high, too dangerous. Fire and debris had already started to threaten its structure. By late morning, chaos ruled the streets. Sirens wailed, radios crackled. Fires burned uncontrolled across multiple floors of WTC-7, sparked by falling debris when the North Tower collapsed at 10:28 a.m. The building had been evacuated. Everyone inside was out. But the fire suppression system failed because it relied on city water mains, many of which had been destroyed in the tower collapses. And so, for hours, the building burned, unnoticed, unfought, unstoppable. At 5:20 p.m., over 7 hours after the towers fell, WTC-7 suddenly gave way. In the span of just over 7 seconds, the entire building crumpled. The collapse began internally. Core columns gave way, floors pancaked downward, and then the outer facade fell straight down into a perfect pile. To the untrained eye, it looked surgical, deliberate, controlled, and for many, that's exactly what they believed it was. In the hours and days after the attack, few people paid attention to Building 7. The loss of the Twin Towers, the 3,000 lives taken, the rescue operations, it was all too overwhelming. But soon, people began asking questions. Why had a 47-story skyscraper, untouched by a plane, collapsed like that? Why had it fallen so cleanly? Why had it taken over 7 hours? And most crucially, why had no other modern, steel-framed building in history collapsed solely due to fire? Until then. In 2002, FEMA released a preliminary report. It was vague, pointing to fire-induced damage, but admitting they had little physical evidence. The wreckage had been cleared swiftly. Most of the steel had already been melted down and shipped overseas for recycling. There would be no smoking gun. That vacuum of certainty was all it took. Conspiracies flourished online. They pointed to the tenants, the intelligence agencies, the financial records. They pointed to Larry Silverstein, the leaseholder, who said on PBS that afternoon, "I remember getting a call from the fire department commander. I said, 'You know, We've had such terrible loss of life. Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. And they made that decision to pull. To conspiracy theorists, pull it was a smoking gun. To them, it meant controlled demolition. Never mind that pull it was often slang among firefighters for withdrawing teams, not buildings. The line took on a life of its own. They questioned how such a symmetrical collapse could happen from random fire, how the BBC could accidentally report WTC-7's collapse 20 minutes before it happened, while the building still stood in the background. The inconsistencies, the odd footage, the silence, it all fueled doubt. Was it possible that explosives were planted? Was it part of a cover-up? Or was the truth much less cinematic? In 2008, after years of investigation, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, released their final report. It was massive. According to NIST, the collapse of WTC-7 was not caused by explosives. Their computer models, simulations, and site analysis found that the initiating event was the failure of a single steel girder on the 13th floor. Here's what happened. In plain terms, fires raged uncontrolled for hours on the lower floors, particularly floors 7 through 13. Inside the building, long-span floor beams expanded from the intense heat. These beams pushed a crucial girder, Girder A 2001, off its seat. Once that girder fell, it triggered a progressive collapse of surrounding floors. That internal domino effect weakened the core structure. Eventually, column 79, the critical vertical column in the building's eastern core, buckled, and with it came the rest. NIST's report called it the first known instance of the total collapse of a tall building primarily due to fires. No explosives, no conspiracy, just an overlooked vulnerability, steel expansion, and sustained heat. The visuals of the collapse, so neat and clean, were misleading. Once the core fell, the outer shell had nowhere to go but down. But not everyone bought it. Even today, WTC-7 remains one of the most controversial aspects of 9/11. Multiple engineers, architects, and former intelligence officials have questioned the official explanation. Some cite inconsistencies in the modeling. Others point out the lack of surviving physical evidence, since most of the steel was removed before a full forensic analysis. Groups like Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth continue to demand independent investigations. They argue that the laws of physics don't align with the official version, that freefall speed, vertical collapse, and molten metal sightings suggest something else. To date, no credible evidence of explosives has surfaced, and NIST stands by its findings. But the lingering distrust, fueled by years of misinformation, official blunders, and public trauma, keeps the questions alive. The story of WTC-7 isn't just about a building. It's about what happens when trust collapses alongside concrete. In a world still haunted by 9/11, WTC-7 became a symbol, for some of hidden truths, for others of how the internet can twist tragedy into theory. The truth, however, is a warning engineers and city planners still heed today. It's not just planes that bring down buildings. Sometimes it's the fire that comes after, and what we failed to plan for before. Thank you for listening to Road to Ruins. Subscribe for more true stories where systems fail and people pay the price.